In the recent patch that introduced the first DLC for Black Ops 3, there was a nerf to a beloved perk that everyone with a decent pair of headphones loved to use: awareness. The patch notes were quite vague, reading as follows: reduced audible range bonus. Obviously, that tells us diddly squat about how it was truly affected. So I decided to do a bit of testing and show everyone just what they did to it. I've heard people say that it's now completely worthless, and I've also heard people say that the nerf barely touched it at all. So let's take a look and see who's right and who's wrong. First of all, you should be aware that there are quite a few sound settings that you can toggle through. If you go to Options, Audio, and then Audio Presets, you can see them all. A majority of the population will use the Treyarch mix, the high boost, or the super crunch. Most pros, however, favor the super crunch. And with that said, let me just show you a comparison between the Treyarch mix and the super crunch. So the first clip is the Treyarch mix setting with the awareness perk versus the dead silence perk while running. The second clip is exactly the same, but with the super crunch setting. As you should have been able to tell, the super crunch is clearly louder. The only drawback is that this setting makes everything louder. Explosions, background noises, etc. This can actually make it difficult to distinguish footsteps. But since everyone seems to favor the super crunch, that's what I'm going to be showing off the nerf to awareness with. So I selected a spot on Nuketown to take measurements. I had the runner stand in the trailer in the middle of the map, while the listener stood with his back against the wall. I then had the runner come at me with a full sprint and marked where I could just barely start to hear his footsteps. Now obviously take note that this isn't 100% precise, but it's close enough for what we're trying to measure. I'd like to give a huge shout out to the two people that assisted me in testing here. First, Gamertag Mingy Waffle, who plays on the Xbox One. He provided me the pre-patch footage. The tester that helped me on the PS4 is Twin Project, who also has his own YouTube channel that you can find in the description. So in this first clip, it's the awareness perk versus a runner with no dead silence pre-patch. So obviously before awareness was nerfed. Having measured it, I could hear him as soon as he left the trailer, which is an insanely long range. Now let's look at the same scenario, but post-awareness nerf. I could not hear him directly upon sprinting from the trailer this time, so the nerf is immediately noticeable. But it's not as bad as I had assumed. And just for comparison purposes, here's also a clip of no awareness perk versus no dead silence perk. You can tell that with the super crunch enabled and a good headset, you're still very capable of hearing sounds from quite a ways away. So now let's look at all three of these distances visually stacked up against each other. So again, from where the purple stops and all the way down is no awareness perk at all. Where the orange stops and all the way down is the new awareness range. And where the red stops and all the way down is the old awareness range. So basically, the red area is how much awareness was nerfed. And if I had to guess, I'd say it's about a 30% reduction in audible range for the awareness nerf. Now you may also look at this and think, if the awareness perk now only allows you to hear that little chunk of orange more than having no awareness perk at all, what good is it? Well, that's true, but you have to remember that I measured the furthest distance where I could first hear the footsteps at the faintest level. As they got closer, the awareness perk really showed. I'll play two of the clips again, but just when the enemy is close to me. The first clip is without the awareness perk, and the second clip will be with the awareness perk. You should have heard a very noticeable difference. And again, that's where the awareness perk shines. So while yes, it did take a noticeable decrease in its furthest range possible, it's still very effective, but I'll touch base on that more in a second. So that test was awareness versus no dead silence. How about awareness versus dead silence? Now I'm not gonna lie here, testing this was incredibly hard. It was very difficult to tell when I could first hear the footsteps. I scooted back from where I measured the other test because of this, so definitely don't compare these results to my previous test. Like I said, and able to show it visually, I needed a bit more room. This first clip is pre-awareness nerf, and again is awareness versus dead silence. It was hard to judge the exact location, but looking via an aerial view in theater mode, I determined it was this pink line. Now let's look at the nerfed awareness versus dead silence range. Again, using the aerial view from theater mode, I found it to be right around this brown line. So now let's take a look at them both together. Right off the bat, you'll notice that dead silence does not counter awareness. You can clearly still hear a dead silence user, and these are the maximum distances you can do so. Keep in mind that at the far end of these distances, it was extremely faint, which you should have been able to tell via the clips I showed. Upon getting closer to the awareness user though, they were easily identifiable. So again, not a huge nerf to awareness, but definitely noticeable. Next up, I wanted to mention the adjustment to Reaper's footsteps. Before that though, did anyone notice the stealth nerf to Reaper's scythe? The amount of ammo it has was again nerfed, decreasing from 160 to 120. So the scythe went from having 200 in the beta and when the game first released, to having 160 for a few months, and now down to 120. Anyways, back to the footstep issue. The patch notes read as follows. Equalized footstep audio volume to the same audibility of other specialists. So prior to this patch, Reaper was all sorts of mucked up. Not only were his footsteps fainter than everyone else's, but they were also extremely glitchy. If you played with him consistently, you'd definitely notice that his footsteps would disappear completely throughout a match. For example, this clip right here. First of all, this was the class I was running with the Reaper Specialist. As you can tell, there's no dead silence here at all. I have Engineer in my tier 3 perk. So listen very carefully to this clip. First you'll hear my footsteps, then they'll cut out, and then they'll vanish completely, as if I have dead silence on. So as you could hear, it was basically like a free dead silence perk at times, and often this glitch would last the entire match, ensuring you had a slight advantage over others in the game. But the patch apparently fixed this, as well as made his footsteps on par with everyone else. I tested this pre-patch and post-patch, but I only noticed a very slight increase in sound. The first clip is awareness versus a dead silence Reaper player before the patch, and the second clip is the same, but after the patch. So as I said, just a slight increase in footstep sound, but compared to all the other characters, it's a noticeable increase and it equalizes the playing field. Lastly, I just wanted to make mention of a few things I noticed while testing this awareness nerf. I'm not sure if this is common knowledge or not, but it definitely was to me. The first thing I noticed was that dead silence did not make you completely silent to someone who doesn't have awareness. Obviously, I knew if you did have awareness, you could clearly hear someone with dead silence, but I thought for sure they were completely silent if there was no awareness perk on. So listen carefully in this clip as someone with the dead silence perk runs in circles around me. Now granted, he was literally right up my ass doing this, but I could definitely hear his footsteps without awareness on. Now strangely, Reaper with dead silence could not be heard. Watch this clip here. I have no awareness on and the Reaper user has dead silence. It's the same scenario as before, except you can't hear him this time. Very strange. I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts on this awareness nerf. As I mentioned earlier, if I had to guess based on my own testing, I'd say the awareness perk received a 30% reduction in its audible range bonus. This sounds bad on paper, but is it really a bad thing? If anyone ran awareness prior to this nerf with a good headset, you probably encountered some confusion at one point or another. With how far away you could hear footsteps, sometimes it would seem like the enemy was right next to you, when in actuality, they were quite a distance away. This could definitely confuse even an experienced sound whore from time to time. Now, however, since the footsteps are picked up at a closer range, it makes it quite a bit easier to distinguish when a person is actually creeping up on you. So in essence, this nerf could actually be considered a buff by some people. Of course, not everyone is going to see it like that. In fact, most people will look at the 30% reduction and decide it's worthless now, and probably opt for some other perk. I'd at least give it a whirl in some free-for-all matches coupled with dead silence and form your own opinion first. Let me know in the comments though if you agree with this nerf or if you think they took it too far. Regardless, hopefully my testing provided you some useful information in making your decision.